meaning when you look at its use in other places outside your junior high. So we got to go a little bit bigger than that. So what did Mark mean? What kind of fear is he talking about in verse 8? I'll put it on the screen again for you. They said nothing. Why did they say nothing? They're afraid. They're afraid, right? And perhaps that they're afraid is commentary on the whole thing, right? Because they see the tomb, they meet an angel, they get the message of the resurrection, and they are in fear. I think that's a good fear, a healthy fear, a positive fear, and it's one that you should have too. Let me explain. So, first off, to help us out with context, to show that Mark is not somehow different than the other Gospels or conflicting with the other Gospels, we have Matthew 28. Because Matthew 28 actually gives us a statement about those same women in the same moment, and that they're in fear. But he gives you other words that help, at least for English, modern English, help you understand the context. So Matthew 28:8, they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to report it to his disciples. You don't, now see, this is a perfect example, because in English we don't combine fear and joy. This is like not what we combine, because we tend to have a very negative connotation of fear. Fear is terror. Fear is a negative and bad thing. But here, it's not. Fear is considered a healthy thing. Fear is a proper response to something powerful and amazing that God has done. Fear is about letting the weight of the moment hit you fully. That's not a bad thing. So that would be in Matthew. Now the word here is phobu, which is the same as the word we see in Mark. So it really is the same thing he's talking about. So you start to get the idea. Mark, just because he says fear doesn't mean what maybe you're thinking he means. Larry Hurtado, who's a scholar who's written on, a lot of stuff, well-respected guy, he says the following. Trembling and bewilderment and afraid in verse 8 of Mark 16. He says similar language elsewhere in Mark describes human reaction to a wondrous event, miracle or revelation of divine power. And he mentions several verses, 2:12, 5:42, 4:41, 5:15, 5:33, and 9:6. I'm going to go through specific verses, but when Mark uses the word phobos and phabu, when he uses the word fear, phobos is like the respectful one. This is not important to remember that, but you do realize the name sounds kind of like phobia, yeah. Although it doesn't mean the same thing as the modern word phobia. That's a mistake a lot of people make there. But when Mark uses the term, as Hurtado points out, is it's often not this negative thing. It's often a positive thing. It's a mixed bag. Sometimes it's very positive. Sometimes it's negative. It tends to be depending on who the fear is directed to. So 12 times in Mark, he uses the word fear or phobos. 12 times he uses the word. When he uses the term, he sometimes uses it in a very negative connotation. Like the Sadducees were afraid of the crowds. That's obviously a negative connotation. Fear of man, generally a bad idea, right? Other times, somebody's afraid in a different sense. Now, the times where it's used that's closest to Mark 16:8 clues us in on why these women were scared. Like, what should I think about the fear of the women? Because Mark does focus on the response of the women to the resurrection. That's his final moment, right? He wants, I think, to focus on our response to the resurrection is how it applies to us, but we'll come back to that. So 12 times in Mark it's used. Here are some examples that are closest to the Mark 16:8 use. This is when Jesus calms the storm. It says they became very much afraid. I said to one another, "Who is this? Even the wind and the sea obey." Do you see how it's being used? Like, we might read fear as just being terror. They have like a kind of fear, right? And it's like, why are you afraid? Like I said, it's a two-sided coin. But after seeing Jesus do this miracle, saying, "Hush, be still," the wind, and boom, it becomes calm, they have a different kind of fear. And this fear is not a fear of the storm. This fear is now shifted. This fear is a healthy fear of Jesus, because it asks the question, who is this? They're shocked by the moment, by the miracle that Jesus has produced. This is the same kind of fear. It's the same kind of fear in 16. They're shocked by the empty tomb, by the resurrection of Christ, by the angelic messenger, and they're shaking. Have you experienced this where something so profound and powerful happened? It wasn't a bad thing, but when you're shaking, your adrenaline's pumping. Not just because you're scared and wobbly, but because you're impressed by the moment. You are deeply impacted by the importance of the situation. That's what's happening here in Mark 4:49. The gravity of the situation. It's nothing bad. Mark 5:15 gives us another example. They came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down. So Jesus has cast the demon out of the demoniac, right? Clothed in his right mind, the very man who had the legion, and they then they asked Jesus to leave, right? So they became frightened. That's the same word. Now, here I want to be careful with how I interpret this. I recommend that we consider that the fear was good, but what it was directed to was bad. So when they see the man, they see the manifestation of the power of Christ to heal this man and put him in his right mind, cast the demons out and all that. They're blown away by it. They're impressed by it. They think it's powerful. They think it's moving. But the reaction to that, the fear is proper, right? Wow, what does this mean that Jesus can do this? But then they ask him to leave. That was a bad response. This is the same like double-edged sword we get when we encounter Christ in the gospel. We can sometimes we can be aware of it and we ask him to leave.